Chapter 59. Uncertain and Wearying Times. Mid-1940s. Worry. Wart-Vosk person who stresses easily. She was a real worrywart. I recall my father Earl Harness saying that his mother Melinda was a worrywart. It was a term used of those who stressed over what might come unexpected to them. Today we hear of people having anxiety or having panic attacks, but a mother who has 4 sons in the war and is caring for 4 children at home, plus a husband and a sister-in-law, might have some reason to feel anxious while living in the Ozark Hills in the 1940s. Besides having survived the Great Depression and Dust Bowl in the last decade while raising a family, the world was at war. On January 25, 1945, Sergeant Perry Harness was wounded at Ingwiller, France. His unit was in sight of the Rhine River, which bordered Germany. He had been trained to fire weapons, ranging from a pistol to a rocket launcher, but then he had been assigned to a weapon called a bazooka gun. It was a man-portable, recoilless anti-tank rocket launcher. On a particular day, his unit was under fire from a German artillery. He knew that a German forward observer called a spotter was hidden somewhere nearby and calling in coordinates to the remote artillery battery. Perry noticed a church steeple and thought it might be where the potential spotter was. He asked his superior about shooting the steeple with a rocket. The officer asked him to first get closer before firing. In his attempt to locate nearer, he suddenly fell upon the snow and felt an intense burning in his leg. The snow became red from blood loss as he realized he had been shot. Calling for a medic, he lay there and waited until a jeep pulled up and loaded him. He was taken to a field hospital where he underwent field surgery. The Army doctor was a young man, and Perry said he didn't do a good job of sewing his knee up. He was put in a very heavy and cumbersome full-leg cast. After surgery, Perry was sent on to rehab in Paris, where he would celebrate his birthday in the hospital. He was told by a medical officer that he was not battle-worthy and would be shipped stateside. They put him on an airplane for America that first stopped over at the Azores Islands, which is 1,000 miles off the shore of Portugal. One of the plane's motors had a miss, so they stayed overnight to have it worked on. The next morning, it flew to Newfoundland and then on to New York City. From New York, Perry was sent to the Veterans Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. Then he was moved to a rehab hospital in Daytona, Florida. From there, he was sent home to the Ozark Hills. It had taken nearly 4 months from the time of his injury till he made it home. Back to Sergeant William Earl Harness, he was on the front lines in the small country of Luxembourg. Population 2020, 626,000. During the conflict, he was taking K-rations to soldiers when a German rifle-launched grenade exploded close to him. Some shrapnel caught him in his eyebrow and clipped the skin and bone, causing blood to run down his face. He refused medical attention and continued his orders. On another occasion, he heard an artillery shell coming in and dove into his foxhole without his gas mask. It was laying on the edge of the foxhole. When the shell blast went off, it ripped the gas mask into pieces. Only God knows how many times he came near to death. Because Earl was a medic, he had a large red cross displayed on his helmet and armbands on each arm, displaying the red on white cross. The U.S. medics did not carry weapons, and by Geneva Convention laws, they were not to be shot. However, shells did not differentiate medics when fired. Some said that the medics helped win the war with gauze and scissors, With the knowledge of how to stop bleeding and disinfect a wound, Earl helped countless men survive the war. In one of the many conflicts Earl served, the enemy fired a shell that blew up a tree and one of his fellow medics while attempting to rescue the wounded. The comrade was severely wounded by the shell explosion. Earl made his way to the young man whose name was Ringler from Detroit, Michigan. He said, "Sergeant, I'm hurt badly, and I'm not going to live." Earl told him that he didn't think he was hurt that bad. Ringler disagreed and said, "I'm hurt bad, and I'm not going to live." Then he requested Earl, "Please get in touch with my wife and tell her I died bravely and that I love her." Ringler died in Earl's arms, and like so many, his blood was spilt on foreign soil and without the company of loved ones. Earl said that he later found her contact and sent her the dying request Ringler had made, but she never responded back to him. Earl said that, unfortunately, a lot of American girls married servicemen and collected the $10,000 life insurance check issued by the Army with little grief or remorse. He also said that many men called out to their mother in their last moments of life. In the Battle of the Bulge, Earl's division was in the forest of Luxembourg. Today, 1/3 of the land is forest, being encircled until they were able to push the Germans back into Rhineland. The land there was more level and open, and when they reached the Rhine River, it was difficult for the Germans to cross with their equipment, allowing the Allied planes to make waste of them. Earl could see that the war was going well for the Americans, and hopefully would soon be over. Earl's division evacuated 40,000 killed or wounded soldiers from their division during the war. When he checked the roster for names of the 30 men he had started with, only 5 men were not killed or seriously wounded. At that time, there was a point system for giving soldiers a 50-day rest and leave. Earl had enough points and was among the first to get his ticket to go home on furlough. From June 1944 till April 1945, Sergeant Harness had been on the front lines of the war for near 300 days. He was moved to a port city and put on a ship that was carrying German prisoners to America. Earl was assigned to guard the Germans, but when the ship encountered rough seas, he became very seasick. He said that the prisoners laughed at him as they didn't get sick, but at this point, I must back up and tell a prisoner story from a few weeks earlier. While he had been encircled in the Battle of the Bulge by the Germans, he was attempting to move some of the wounded as dark set in. He and a few other medics came upon some Germans who had gotten separated from their outfit and were hunkered around a fire. Earl had his men circle them and make some noise to make the Germans think they were surrounded. Then Earl barked out 2 German words he knew, "Come here." The men laid down their weapons and put their hands over their heads and came to him. He had his men take their rifles, and then he conscripted the prisoners to carry the stretchers of the wounded. One German was reluctant, and Earl kicked him in the seat of the pants and pointed to the stretcher. The man cooperated. Earl thought little of the event, but was later awarded a Bronze Star Medal for the bravery of his action. While on ship making his way home, Earl learned of the death of President Roosevelt, FDR. He had served his country for 12 years as president before suffering a stroke. Vice President Harry Truman became the new war president on April 12, 1945. How difficult it must have been to immediately become president and be faced with a war on 2 fronts, the European and the Pacific theaters. Reflection. I cannot imagine how relieved my father must have been to no longer be in places like he had been over those past 300 days. From D-Day in Normandy to the Rhine in Germany, he had cared for the wounded and dying, risking his life every day. He was 25 years old and had seen the worst and best of what men could do to each other. His generation hoped that they had fought the last great war of mankind, but only God can give lasting peace with the promise of an age to come. I will do away with the bow, the sword, and war from the land. I will make you lie down in safety. Hosea 2:18.